Washington has just wrapped up its 10th spring practice.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. And Lars, we are just getting back from Washington's 10th spring practice here on Tuesday evening. It's about 7:30 as we press record. And real quick, shout out to everydayers Bruce and Florence, who came over, said hi to us before practice. We had a nice little conversation with them. So it's always fantastic just meeting everybody who just says that they like the pod, comes up to us, says hello over the course of spring practice. Really does mean a lot to us. So shout out to both of them. Thank you so much for just everything it is to all the everydayers. Truly, if you ever listen to an episode of the show, we really are grateful for all your support. And Lars, there was a lot on the field at spring practice on Tuesday, and I feel like we got to start with just the most important position, quarterback, because it was another really good day for Will Rogers.
Yeah, and it's been good to see because, again, there was that kind of 3 or 4 practice run where Damon was almost like the QB1. It was like, oh, boy, like Damon's actually kind of cooking here. Like, we don't want to seriously entertain this just yet, but obviously, Damon has certainly earned the right to have that discussion. But then in these last 2 or 3 practices, especially, we've seen Will just be on point. But one thing you noticed, and again, that I noticed even earlier in practice for second week, where Will Rogers is very hard on himself. So I think seeing his struggles necessarily isn't a bad thing because of how hard he is on himself and kind of just how much we've seen him get better over the course of these last middle third to last third of spring ball. And I think that's probably to be expected once you start to think about it. Damon probably knew what they wanted to run a little bit more. Will, coming in as a transfer from Mississippi State, recommitting to the new staff, kind of has to get a feel for it a little bit more and things like that. But again, a seasoned quarterback like Will Rogers, we kind of expected this, right? But it's still good to see. And worth noting also, we can see both quarterbacks go in 11 on 11. So it was also nice to see, hey, it's not just a one-off offensive line, and then we're kind of letting Will or Damon get a 7 on rep, which again is important, but you can clearly see a difference where Will has 2 or 3 things in his game when it shines in 11 on 11 scrimmages. And there's a couple of things that Damon does really well, which are different than Will. But you can also see how Damon is going to grow into having a full arsenal like Will does once he gets a year and a half in the program.
You're absolutely right, because one thing that, we've talked about with Damon, especially that we noticed again today, is just the zip he puts on the ball. And while Will Rogers is extremely accurate, he doesn't just have quite the same, just as you like to say, the same RPMs on the football, just when he's throwing, where he's very accurate. He can get the ball downfield, but it's just not with the same velocity sometimes. But with that being said, we also did see a couple of really nice plays from him today, where the biggest one that stood out to me, the play of the day, was Jeremiah Hunter coming across the back of the end zone. And it was in the 7-on-7 portion of practice, but he just kind of stuck one of his hands out and just made a fantastic grab to reel it in. And it's something where, I wrote about it a little bit over on Huskies Wire. It's something we've talked about a lot on the show as well, is where Denzel Boston still had a really great day. He had a nice touchdown where he went over the top of Darren Barkins, but Will, DeMarcius, whoever is going to be at quarterback at any point in the game, whether it be in a blowout, whatever might be going on, they're going to have 2 elite receivers to throw to. And that's something that cornerback Thaddeus Dixon told us after practice, where he was saying, you don't necessarily ever want to compare, and people are going to try to do that with Rome being a day one guy, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan being who they are, but there really isn't that much drop off in what's coming in. And it's really nice. Obviously when we say it, that's one thing, but when you hear it from the guys in the room, that's a whole different story, especially from somebody like Thaddeus, who's been going up against them every day for a little over a year now.
Right, exactly. In Peach Price, I kind of echo the same sort of sentiment where it's like, these are some dudes we're going against. These aren't slouches by any stretch. And we knew that. Yeah. But again, I think even Jeremiah has his hands. I mean, he made a number of catches today where he went down with the Jalen McMillan shoestring, and then he had the one-hander again which may or may not have actually counted it for counting in a game for different reasons. Partially because
stepping out of the back of the end zone, but semantics. The ref said it counted, so it counts.
Well, I was going to say, and also, wasn't there a couple of sacks on that play too, or was that the Will Rogers?
No, that was a different play.
I was going to, but either way, it still counts, right, on some level. And so I think seeing that again, there is a drop off, right? Because obviously you don't have a Roma Junze, but you do have guys that are not truly as far off as what the perception would be, right? Where they're probably 8 to 10 months away from where those guys left, right? Where they still got, Jeremiah's probably got a little bit more to grow in his game, just in terms of maybe filling out the route tree, things like that. Because again, with his size, you can do a lot. Where we saw it early on in the first couple of weeks, where it's, hey, just go throw a fade ball and see what happens. Like, okay, that's one trick, but you want to be able to do a couple of other things. And so seeing that over the back of the end zone touchdown and things like that, where the one thing that is carried over from Jamarcus Shepard is the spatial awareness all the receivers have. From Audric Harris to Denzel Boston to Jeremiah Hunter, Giles Jackson, they are all very aware of where that sideline is. And they're making NFL catches, not college catches, which I think is an important distinction.
Absolutely. And that's something where when we look at just everybody on the roster, and one of the things that it's not just Jamarcus Shepard, it's it was the whole coaching staff with the last one. It's this whole coaching staff as well, where it's become such a big thing in the NFL, where we want to make you defend every single blade of grass on the field. So when you're on the sideline, no matter where you are, you have to know exactly where you are at all times. And obviously that's a very cliche thing to say, but it's one thing to say it, and it's a whole nother thing to do it. And that's something where I was thinking about that same thing when it's something we talked about, but it's just great that you mentioned that, because one of the things that we've seen a lot when UW gets down 5-10 yard line and some of the 11-on-11s is they really like to run a fade ball. They love throwing fade routes. And it's one thing where, you can argue the effectiveness of the play as a whole, but when you have two really big physical receivers that are super long and can go over the top of guys like Jeremiah Hunter, like Denzel Boston it's a whole different thing. And it's really cool to see them be able to do that and just know exactly where they are to get 2 feet down on a whole lot of just these spectacular catches that they're making on the sideline. But I feel like we got away from the main point of the conversation, which is the quarterbacks. And we're going to get to it in the next segment a little bit, but as long as the offensive line can hold up, no matter who's back there is going to have a really good shot at just having some nice numbers and getting the ball all over the place. Where a take I had over on Huskies Wire is I think this receiving core can support 2,000 yard receivers just between the offense itself, between the talent, and just whoever's at quarterback.
Right, exactly. And I think the other thing to mention kind of with the quarterback help and Will Rogers specifically is the checkdowns, right? Where he's getting the ball in different types, right? Where he's still taking the check down like he did at Mississippi State. But then the other concepts that are in play in the offense where, okay, you do have multiple options, kind of similar to Ryan Grubb, right? Where somehow, some way, somebody is going to be open. You just got to have like 2 or 3 seconds. 3 to 4 is being generous, but 2 or 3 seconds to find somebody open. And somebody will be, whether it's Jonah Coleman, Adam Muhammad got some first team reps a little bit. Well, 1.5 team reps, I think is probably more accurate to say, but again, still showing the concepts of what the offense can do. And I'm glad you mentioned kind of the sideline element, because it's both of these quarterbacks can go sideline to sideline, hashed, end zone to end zone. It's not just, Will's good with the fade ball, but between the 20s, he struggles. It's like, no, actually between the 20s, he thrives. It's a matter of, can he add something beyond the fade route to mix in? But then again, that's why you have a really good run game, right? So all these things, because the main point was the quarterbacks, for a quarterback's best friend is a great supporting cast. You could have a great quarterback like Caleb Williams and win 7 games because you're supporting cast and offensive line. And granted, the USC defense is a different discussion, but you have all the weapons you want. You have a great quarterback, but if you don't have all the actual weapons in the line in front of him, it's not going to do as much.
Lars, that being said, let's jump into the offensive line. Right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book, and going to do it again because it's just one of my favorite things to do. Because as the everydayers are listening to this, on Wednesday, game 2 of the first round of the NBA playoffs is kicking off on the Eastern Conference side, and I'm still riding with the Boston Celtics to get all the way to the finals, and I'm going to keep doing it. And, without Jimmy Butler in that series, it feels like it might be a little bit of a cakewalk. Might have jinxed it because I said that. But if you're on FanDuel, I'd throw some money on the Celtics. So, Lars, the offensive line has certainly struggled over the last week, but let's start with some good news, where we saw Gaard Memmelaar go through some drills today. He got into some of the contact drills where he's not doing team stuff. He's not doing 100% of the drills. I would say somewhere, 50, maybe 60% of the teamwork, or not the teamwork, just the drills themselves. So he's starting to ramp up, and he's somebody where you don't need to go get 4 starting caliber offensive linemen in the portal, because you and I both believe he was on track to start before he got hurt in fall camp last year. So he's somebody where when he's healthy, he's going to slide in a starting spot. Is it going to be center? Maybe. We've seen him take some snaps there. Is it left guard? Maybe. You can figure that out. But he's one guy where his progress is encouraging because the defensive line is certainly bullying this offensive front at times.
Yeah, I mean, at times it's being generous, but I mean, yeah, there's also, I mean, they're also doing scheme stuff where half the line is blitzing, so it's the other half literally.
Yeah, when they do the 9-on-9 drills, they call it.
Yeah, they just take a knee and call it half a day. But to your point, yeah, I mean, it's exactly kind of what we anticipated, right? Where it's hard to get quality reps when, I mean, they're still getting quality reps, but it's hard to get a true assessment of what these guys can do when 3/5 of the line, 4/5 of the line is not going to start, or if anything, play a significant role. Now that's in 24. Now 25, Pocky Finau, Elijah Jaquette, Kaylee Tafai, Zach Henning, a number of these guys will certainly, without question, be in the mix. And so these reps are good for them to get that kind of future. Oh, think about Roger Rosengarten in 21, where he got a couple, not scout team, but special teams reps, didn't get any offensive line rates, but it's that future game experience that allows you to say, okay, cool, I can come in, boom, next year, Zach Henning is your starting tackle or guard, Kaylee Tafai is a starting tackle or guard, things like that. And Landon Hatchett comes back, so your center problem is over. So it's really just about getting a good enough line this year for Will Rogers to have 3 seconds or even 2 seconds, 2 to 3 seconds, and for Jonah Coleman to not have to bounce it outside 10 to 20 times a game, right? That's pretty much all you're asking. If you can get, what do you want to say, like a top 25, top 30 offensive line? Does it need to be top 10, top 50? Well, I was just going to say, but I'm saying it doesn't even have to be top 25 to have this offense executed at the level that it needs to win, let's say 7, 8, 9 games, right? So then the rest of that just comes down to what can the defense do.
Absolutely. Where it's, as long as it's in the top half, I think it's going to be something serviceable where you can find ways to scheme, you can find ways to fix it. But it's something where one of the things I've got written down my notes here is that Jacob Lane had a really good day, especially when they line him up on the interior, because he was winning with speed. He was winning with power. He was winning in every different possible way. And another guy who you and I have highlighted previously on the show is Lance Holtzclaw. He also had a really good day where he was winning off the edge with speed over and over and over and over again. So it's something where it's nice to see the defensive line get these reps, because we really want to see the pass rush step up after what it was last season. But you kind of have to look at it and caveat it to a certain extent and just say, all right, there are going to be some more bodies along the offensive line, 2, maybe 3, who knows, maybe they take 4 after, getting D'Angelo Titiali from Portland State. And it's just kind of, we'll see what else happens, where there have been some rumors about the SMU offensive tackle Marcus Bryant potentially looking elsewhere. So we'll see what kind of happens with everything that's going on in terms of the transfer portal, like we discussed on yesterday's show. But, and that's why, a couple weeks ago we had a show where we said it's in a better spot than you think, because you only need a couple of bodies. And as long as they can contribute at a solid level, you don't need the elite Joe Moore award-winning offensive line play that you did last season, where it's something we've said, where this team's probably not going to be competing for a national championship. They're probably not going to be in the college football playoff, but we still expect them to be a good team. We still expect them to win 7, 8 games, maybe 9, as you said, but a lot of that is going to come down to the offensive line, and the transfer portal is going to be the biggest part of that.
Right, because again, what we've seen in fall camp or spring camp, if it carries over to the fall, I mean, Hockey Phenos look good, right? Again, it's still for a freshman. Again, to your point, you got to caveat it with, again, he's a true freshman, so it's not going to look great all the time. But again, you can see why they kind of like him at that spot down the road sort of thing. But again, if you're starting with, let's just say two or 3/5 of your offensive line that either hasn't started a game or hasn't played significant minutes, that's kind of a problem, right? Where you can break in, right, a Parker Brailsford as a redshirt freshman and not worry about, okay, well, you have Troy Fautano, Roger Rosengarten, and 2 junior or senior guards right around you. You can sacrifice one spot, right? But you don't want to do that to multiple spots because, again, as good as these guys might be and projectable as they might be, let's be real, the Big Ten competition is not even what they've seen in fall camp from the defense. So I have a hard time envisioning if you truly had to go with, let's just say let's say you include Logan Sapagu as your offensive line. So that's 2, right? Throw in one more. That's still not really going to cut it because then that means you're relying too much on those younger guys and things like that, which again, we're not discrediting that their potential down the road is not going to be impacted, but it's what are you going to do in 24? Because Jedd can't go 6-6 or 7-5. I can kind of see it, but that's almost pushing it, right? This should be an 8-4 team with the correct offensive line, and I mean the capital is there. It's just a matter of can you get those guys to close, and that again, there's various factors why they don't, right? It's not for a lack of effort, it's not for a lack of resources and things like that. It's just a matter of sometimes it's the way the chips fall, where we look at the SMU transfer decides to stay a little closer to home, things like that, where okay, but at the same time, you might miss on guys, but you can't also, no disrespect intended to the 2 transfers that have come in so far, you can't keep relying on FCS guys to play up to an FBS level, especially your first year in the Big Ten.
Sure, and I mean it's something where if they come in and they impress, that's great. There you go. That's a really good take, and that's something that's helpful. But until we see it, we can't just say, yeah, no, that's going to be the guy. Or that's just the way it goes. And it's something where I want to flip back over to the defensive line there for a quick minute, where we're starting to see a lot of really good play from them. And I think that this is going to be a really, really solid defensive line. I think it might surprise some people come this fall where, there are certainly going to be things where it's, oh yeah, of course they're going to look good when they're playing against a bunch of true and redshirt freshmen. And yeah, that's certainly something that you need to have the conversation about. But I think there's a whole lot of talent on this defensive line that's going to find a way to show up. Where I know I've talked about Lance Holtzclaw a lot on the edge. I think Jacob Lane's a really solid player. And then, you can get into Isaiah Ward, who hasn't practiced in a couple of days. Looks like he's dealing with a minor injury. Russell Davis looked really good today. I was really impressed with what I saw from him, where he hasn't really necessarily got a ton of run with even the second team, but he got a lot of that today and definitely looked like he was going to be a solid player where, he's not somebody where I'd say he's ready to start on the edge, but he's certainly somebody who can play a solid role as a supporting player, come in on a couple of pass rush snaps. Maybe he's somebody who can set the edge for you every now and again, where he's definitely a long and lanky kind of guy, but he seems to just be very, very strong for what his frame makes him look like. So there are going to be roles where you can use him. And then of course, once Zach Durfee comes back in the fall, he's certainly going to be the primary just guy that everybody's going to be looking at along the defensive line. But then on the interior as well, Sebastian Valdez has been impressive. Javon Parker, somebody you and I are both really high on. I feel Linnaeus Davis has been really, really good over the last week, where we've seen him start to take some of those steps where it's nice to see him come along, where he's certainly developed his body a little bit more over the last year after, he was coming off an injury in 2023 that he suffered in high school. So it's nice to see him rehab and just fully and get back to a place where he might be able to contribute a little bit at some point this season. But behind him, we've talked about Bryce Butler and this defense where it's really unproven. It's certainly, especially in the front 4, I don't want to say the front 7, because the linebackers are probably the most veteran guys on this team. But in the front 4 especially, there are a lot of questions, mainly because of inexperience. But I think with the athleticism and the talent they have, they could surprise some people. And Lars, speaking of surprises, Elijhah Badger was on campus for an official visit, and we should jump into the transfer portal a little bit. right after a message from our friends over at Monopoly Go. Guys, I need y'all to listen up for this huge announcement. I've been tracking the leaderboards every day, keeping my eye on the scores, putting all my heart into it. And I'm super pumped to announce I am finally on top. That's right. Obviously, I'm talking about the hit mobile game Monopoly Go. You probably heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great mobile twist on classic Monopoly. You can play anywhere, anytime. You explore hundreds of Monopoly boards from Las Vegas to Camelot to the moon, all while raking in a huge fortune. You can charge rent on iconic properties just like classic Monopoly. You can charge your friends rent on your iconic properties, which I think is a really fun aspect of it. Or you can go after their Monopoly money by pulling bank heists and taking wrecking balls to their landmarks. But my favorite part is the leaderboards, where you can see who's a Monopoly tycoon and who's gone bankrupt. So get yourself on the charts and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store and Google Play. And another quick announcement we got to give is to our amazing friends over at Game Time, because Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, which is just fantastic news for me personally, as I'm going to be, traveling a little bit over the summer, going to a couple different ballparks to watch my very mediocre Red Sox team, and saving money on Game Time is going to be a great way to help ease the blow when I inevitably watch them lose yet again. Some of the great things about Game Time are their last minute deals, where you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. They've got flash deals where you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. They also have all-in pricing, where if you toggle this feature, it shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout, and Game Time ticket coverage, where your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets at the Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So, Lars, we touched on receivers in the first segment, and it's not necessarily a room that needs a huge upgrade. But with that being said, getting Elijhah Badger would be a huge upgrade for this team and really make this receiving core go from what we already think is really, really good to potentially one of the best in the Big Ten, in my opinion.
Right, and I was going to say, we saw it last year, right, where you can never have too many good wide receivers, right? Even if, somebody has to take a lesser role, it's like, well, again, just get all the talent in the room and let them figure it out, right? You go back, Elijhah Badger, 4-star recruit in the 2020 class as an athlete out of California. Obviously way more of a receiver, ended up having about 10 touchdowns, over 1,500 yards, 135 catches in the last 2 seasons at ASU. And keep in mind, that's ASU without Jaden Daniels, right? That's not, having an all-Cal. And again, they weren't necessarily the worst quarterbacking team in the Pac-12, but they certainly weren't anywhere near the but they certainly weren't anywhere near the best. And so I think, imagine that type of speed, that type of electricity as the third and fourth option, second, third. Well, it doesn't really matter, right? Because again, Rashid Williams looked good in spring camp, but again, if you can kind of just imagine, you got Denzel, Jeremiah, Giles, and Elijhah Badger. There's your four. Four, that's a dangerous four.
That's a fantastic top four with Elijhah, who's led ASU in receiving yards over the last 2 seasons. Somebody who's super talented. I think he has 2 years of eligibility if he wants it, thanks to the COVID year that everybody gets. But he's somebody who's probably a 1-year guy, and would just be so helpful for not only something we've talked about on the show, where you mentioned Rashid, we can talk about Keith Reynolds, who's just always been really impressive. And it's something where it just adds that extra just electricity, as you said, is a good way to put it, but just that extra threat as well, where when you look at what Denzel and Jeremiah bring, they're guys who can thrive outside the numbers. And Elijah is somebody who has that versatility, that flexibility to play outside, as you said last week, when you talk about Jeremy Bernard, this is the guy who can play a similar role to Jeremy Bernard, where he plays in the slot, he plays outside, can do a little bit of everything, because he's just that kind of athlete. And it leaves Giles Jackson to do all the things that he does best in that slot role on the other side, where he can thrive and do just a whole bunch of different things, where, if Jeremiah or Denzel needs a breather, you can move Elijhah Badger outside, bring Giles Jackson, put him in the slot. So that's just a really fun ad that I think would be a great piece for this team. But One thing that I want to talk about, and I know we've mentioned him a couple times in previous weeks, where one guy who got a lot of run with the first team today is true freshman tight end Decker DeGraff. And he's somebody where I feel like I've said this before, and I mean this as a compliment, where he hasn't done anything that has wowed me per se, where there's not any particular catch where I'm like, whoa, like the Jeremiah Hunter one-handed grab in the back of the end zone. I try to contain myself on the sidelines. It's just so much fun being around all these things. But I admit it, I was one of the people that just went, whoa. And while Decker hasn't done anything that's made me do that, every single day, I find myself just nodding and looking at him just, yeah, this is somebody who looks very advanced for a true freshman in everything he's doing at the position with the receiving work. And it seems like he's developed some nice chemistry with Will Rogers as well.
Yeah, I think right now, if the FanDuel odds have a true freshman book where it says which one's going to play the most games or who would you bet on playing the most games as a freshman, it's Decker DeGraff, at least on offense, right? Because especially when you look at the tight end room, it's a very thin room, even with Charlie Kroll coming in the fall, even if they get one more tight end from a transfer, still, it's like, I think it's been pretty clear, with or without a transfer, they probably should get a tight end, but with or without a transfer, Decker DeGraff has basically played himself into that second tight end role. And if there is an element of blocking that he could improve on, so be it. Like Jordan Papa is going to figure that out on the fly. Like I have no fear with that because we've seen Ryan on practice, but he's not practicing at the pace that Decker is. He's not practicing at the consistent. And I think to your point about, yeah, he doesn't have a wow factor, but almost if you take the bigger picture, it's like, wow, 4-star comes in, no big deal. Like it's kind of like, it's not a wow factor, but it's like, wow, cool. A position that we thought might be a struggle beyond Quentin Moore. At least you now have 2 guaranteed tight ends, and then you can kind of figure out the 2 more moving forward, which also, again, recall back to Elijhah Badger. That's maybe why you go get a receiver who's better than the tight ends that are in the portal. No disrespect to the tight ends in the portal, but there's no Brock Bowers. There's not even a Josh Cuevas in reality, right? Which Cuevas obviously goes to Alabama, but there's no player like him where, okay, you can see the potential upside in a scheme like this. It almost would just be better to bring in an extra receiver, go 4 wide with a tight end, and kind of get creative with the bodies instead of really force yourself to get another tight end who may not be a 1 or 2 year rental anyways. And so that scholarship is better used on an explosive receiver like Badger versus maybe a third blocking tight end who can kind of do a little bit of receiving every now and then, because you only got 85 to roll with. Yeah, they're under the scholarship limit now, but as these spots fill up, these coaches still have to be selective. They're not just going to take a tight end out of the portal for the sake of leveling up in the room from a numbers perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, especially, I feel like when you look at the receiver position, that's one of those ones where you could certainly use that body as well, where we're going to see some two tight end sets. We've talked about that, but just with the way college football has evolved, everything that's going on, we're going to see way more 4 and 5 wide receiver sets. And we like Audric Harris, we like Jason Robinson, we like Justice Williams, we like Keith Reynolds and Rasheed Williams. We think that those are all really talented guys, but the reality of the situation is they're not all the way ready to step into some of those bigger roles yet. And if you can go get an Elijhah Badger and still, obviously give snaps to some of these younger guys, which is one of the goals of the program, something Fisch has said that they want to do, you would much rather have it be, okay, yeah, there's Jeremiah Hunter, there's Denzel Boston, there's Giles Jackson, there's Elijhah Badger, and oh yeah, we're going to throw Rasheed Williams out there too to complete a 5 wide look. That's really nice, and we're certainly going to see that at some point this season. But there's a lot more that you can just say that inspires confidence there compared to, oh yeah, Audric Harris, who next season I think could end up being a really nice contributor. Same thing about Keith Reynolds, same thing about Jason Robinson and Justice Williams as well, where you can say the same thing about all those guys, but it might not be their time just yet. And if you can find a way to upgrade for the short term, it does nothing but good for those guys in the long term, where they can get their bodies right and add more weight and just feel that they're a little bit more comfortable and ready to play at the college level after, playing on the scout team for a season, and they can still participate when they're really young, play as redshirt freshmen, but you don't need to throw all of that at them right away, especially on a team where, as we just spent so much time talking about the offensive line, it looks like there's still going to be that at some positions.
Right, and that also gets to, again, I have no problem playing true freshmen, but if a majority of your starting offense or even in the two deeps is freshmen, that tells me already we're looking at six wins, right? But so at least I think that's kind of the unfortunate world of college football. Is it used to be back in the day where it's like, hey, you could get that 6-6 season and people would understand, and the expectations don't help coming off a national championship. But everyone knows it's not going to be a national championship run back. But you also don't want to have too far of a fall off because, again, that year 2 and year 3 should be more like Chris Peterson's year 3, 4, 5, similar to Kalen, where it's like, okay, you got your guys in the system. Now Demond starts next year, right? Then you have Rasheed Williams starting and Denzel Boston and Keith Reynolds and all these guys. And maybe even Elijhah Badger comes back for one more. But either way, you're still rotating through more younger guys as you go along. But that shouldn't be your one when you're trying to at least win 7. Really, it should be 7, 8 games, and then with the bowl win 9. So that way you can go into 2025, say, okay, we had a 9-win season. We kind of maybe overachieved in some regard, but we have enough young talent still coming back that's going to be even more significant contributors in 25 that it actually allows you to build rather than, hey, we're just going to throw you guys all in and we'll see which one of you sticks.
Lars, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the Everdares for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We've got so much more fun stuff. Like I said, make sure you tune in on Thursday night when we're going to be going live after the conclusion of the first round of the NFL draft with a little breakdown of all the Huskies that went, some things that might be looking forward to over the weekend. So make sure that you stay subscribed, turn on all those notifications, do all that sort of stuff to make sure that you tune in when we go live and we answered some questions as well. And with that being said, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel to new content every single day. So please make sure to leave a like on the video. Click that little bell so you never miss when we do go live or post a new video of any sort. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to leave us a comment down below. If you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it all really does help the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Thursday.